So thank you, hello and welcome to this Africa Travel Week webinar on sustainability, a non-negotiable for the future of Africa. Travel has been extractive for far too long, taking from the people and places we visit, while most of the money goes into corporate pockets, but there is a new way to travel. In a world where sustainability is at the top of every traveler's hot list and on every company's corporate agenda, Africa's got a unique opportunity to position itself as a sustainable destination for the future. So what can we do as the tourism industry to ensure the sustainability of the industry? What projects can we implement to make a tangible difference? And I'm very excited. Joining me today, we have a few very familiar names who are going to help us unpack this. So we have Inge Houbrechts, who's the Global Vice President of Responsible Business for Radisson Hotel Group, all the way from Belgium. We have Hilton Walker, who's the Chief Marketing and Sales Officer for Great Plains Conservation. And we have Paul Gardner, who is the CEO of Mantis Collection. We're thrilled to have them in the room today and really looking forward to a fabulous discussion around what they are doing in their own brands to make sure that we are all more sustainable. So they'll be sharing some sustainability lessons that they've learned over the years and shed some light on how to implement worthwhile sustainable tourism practices. Because Inge, sustainability is a journey, it's not a destination. And I think we always get a little bit scared because we think we have to be 100% sustainable. But really, if we were just better tomorrow than we were today, we would be going in the right direction. So tell us a little bit about what the Radisson has been doing to be more sustainable and to take their guests and their staff on that journey.
Okay, with pleasure, with pleasure. So first of all, maybe saying that Radisson Hotel Group, we are 1,600 hotels in 120 countries. So, and in Africa, we have a history starting in Cape Town about 20 years ago with the Radisson Blue waterfront in Cape Town, which is, by the way, one of our very sustainable hotels, as is this one behind me. So today we have on the continent in Africa about 100 hotels in operation and development in 30 countries. So, of course, it is a journey. I mean, we started with our responsible business. We have Scandinavian roots. So we started over 25 years ago with an environmental policy, and when no one was even talking about this. And then I would say that we have developed this into a program where we focus on think people, think community, and think planet. And specifically on the environment, as an example, we have reduced our carbon, energy, and water footprints with 30% over the last 10 years. So and now we are working on our science-based targets. So that's going to be the commitment to go to net zero by 2050 and making that work for this diversified group around the world. And then specifically, maybe a little word about our hotels in South Africa, because some of them are really outstanding. We focus on, for example, having done Green Key Eco Label. So we work with Green Key around the world, which is like an eco label that has more than 100 criteria that hotels need to comply with, and it has an audit. So that's very important for us because my little team cannot check everything. So we need experts to check. And then we focus on having green buildings also, because we don't own the buildings that we operate. So for example, the building behind me, the Radisson Red Cape Town, is a green build 5-star. So we work with owners to make the buildings greener, which then reduces the carbon footprint. We did a lot about water. We started the informal conversation a little bit about water. We did a lot about water to have actions in the hotels when the drought was hitting a few years ago. And then maybe a last thing that I want to say before I hand it over to the other colleagues on the panel is that we, of course, also focus on the think community and the think people side. And for example, on the people side, our park in Newlands in Cape Town as well is a cooperation with the Deaf Association of South Africa, where we have 30% of the staff who are actually deaf. And that's amazing because it's created so much acceptance with the guests, because these colleagues, they are also front of house. They are not only back of house, they're really also front of house. They are part of the operations. And just by having that example of these wonderful colleagues in hotel, we also had like more acceptance and integration of differently abled people in other hotels. mainly in South Africa, actually, where we had a good success with that. So I'll stop there. I can keep talking about our responsible business for quite a long time, but I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Well, Inga, Lorraine has actually weighed in and she said, hello from cool damp Ilova in Santon. Radisson are setting the bar. So just what you've said there is a really good segue to that, you know, having an example of Radisson showing what can be done and such an amazing story, and other hotels, other properties looking at that and actually knowing what's possible, essentially. Hilton, over to you. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing at Great Plains. I know you've been making waves for several years in this space. What would be some of the highlights from a sustainability perspective that you are teaching us to do better?
I don't know if there's ever one person that can teach one person everything. And I love these conversations because they're collaborative and we come together and share ideas. And I think the most important thing is that as an organization, one should be open to consistently look at how you're impacting on not only your local environment, but also your communities. And your communities are your local stakeholders as well as your guests that are coming in and out. And then obviously you've got other stakeholders in the business like shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. And what we found over the years is that not necessarily in Great Plains, but when we look at other entities, that very often that's where the rubber occurs between financial stakeholders and businesses and intentions, that the disconnect suddenly starts creeping in there. But for us, carbon offsetting, environmental sustainability, et cetera, is not a transactional relationship, it's an experiential relationship. And that's with both our communities and our environments. And we probably a little bit unique in that sense that we're constantly driving all of our revenues that we generate back onto the bottom line to those particular two instances. So anybody that invests inside Great Plains or is a shareholder in Great Plains will never get a return on that investment. Any profits that we generate actually are automatically plowed back into projects on the ground. And we're consistently looking at ways We'll make sure that if we had to remove the property within a short span of time, that we would actually leave no footprint left on that site where we're in. In terms of local communities, they're vertically brought into that business as well. And then we also start taking on bigger, hairy, scarier things, like, for example, the Rhinos Without Borders initiative that we did not so long ago. So that commercially didn't bring much to Great Plains, but was an important aspect in terms of saving a species from poaching hotspots in Southern Africa or South Africa into Botswana. And we've got something really cool on the books. I can't tell you about it just yet, but I am telling you that there's something cool coming. But it's going to be another Noah's Ark type project that we are working on. And in fact, there's two. Another one with a quite a well-known entity internationally. But the point is that offsetting the carbon and offsetting your impact on the environment has to be something that you wake up every single day and you look at. Very topical at the moment is obviously COP26, and it's literally starting next week. And so Great Plains is in the situation right now where we want to reduce our carbon footprint even more by 30% by 2030. And that becomes the tricky aspect. A lot of people struggle in the beginning to start offsetting their carbon footprints because they see it as a big capital outlay. The irony is, in our experience, is that once you get over that hurdle, you can actually make some serious savings on your bottom line in terms of your input costs. But as you get closer to that point of zero, it actually becomes harder, because then you start going down to the finite and you start going down to the minutiae. And that is where the real excitement sits in terms of carbon offsetting and community work, because it's at that level, the harder it gets, that you actually see better rewards coming out of it. And that's where we are in that journey, that we're expecting that by 2030, we'll have moved all of our game drive vehicles, for example, off the grid, or at least off the diesel grid, off the fossil fuel grid. That's not the only project that we're working on, but there we're now scratching our head around in terms of capital outlay. What's it going to cost in terms of converting all of our vehicles? How are we going to charge these things? How are we going to make sure that we work? We're not that lucky in terms of being in Cape Town, where if something breaks, we can go down to the local Tiger Wheel and Tire and just go pick up a new battery. So we have to plan in advance. We have to look forward. We have to create these things that have been indestructible, because Africa also likes to try and break everything down and tries to reduce it to a point of zero. So we have to work with nature in terms of that. But you know, a lot of that is the exciting part. And the irony is, and you referenced this earlier, Natalia, is that as we come out of this pandemic, our biggest fear is that as humans, we're so desperate to reconnect with each other and get back to that humanness that we're going to slip back into what was comfortable prior to the pandemic. And we all recognize that what we were doing prior to the pandemic was not sustainable. And that's why we're having these conversations of 1.5 degrees, et cetera, et cetera. So what are we actually doing in terms of changing that new normal? And what is that new normal going to be? And what leadership is stepping up to be able to show folks that this is something that they need to adapt and need to change on? And that's really where the exciting aspects of sustainability is sitting, is that we need to consider how we change business and what is that new normal of business. If we go back to what we were doing previously, we'll be back in the same boat that we were previously. And so I think that's the challenge that for all businesses need to be looking at. It's moved way beyond leaving linen on a bath towel or a card on a bed, or glass bottles for water, etc., etc. That's the basic fundamentals of now doing business. And ultimately, what we are seeing is that the guests that are staying with us, yes, want to have the safari experience, yes, want to have a cuisine experience, yes, they want to have a wonderful stay in their rooms, but they actually want to know what you're doing behind the scenes, and they spend a lot more time engaging with our staff, of digging deeper into that and having a deeper appreciation of what we're actually doing in terms of both community and conservation work.
So it's demand led, you're not just ticking a box. Essentially, you're actually being asked the pointed question by your guests as to what it is that you're actually doing. Yeah,
in a sense, you also create the demand by leading and driving the conversation. If you wait for your guests to come and ask you about what is the environmental offset program that you've got, or what is a community program that you've got, it's too late, because it's going to take you time to get to scale. So you actually need to have these programs in place. And I think as a tourism industry specifically, there is a watershed moment right now where a lot of companies, in terms of I'm looking towards DMCs, tour operators, and companies that book these component parts of the guest itinerary, that's where a high level of education needs to start coming through, and a high level of commitment needs to start coming through. Prior to the pandemic, it was almost, and I use this very flippantly, but it was like a cocaine-fueled fest party. We couldn't keep up with the demand. There were guests falling out of trees. We were just booking things. We were running things like wait lists. I mean, who remembers what a wait list is? But there was so much business that sustainability was kind of like a secondary question. What we now need to do is we need to move that to the primary question. We need to make sure that we're offsetting that before the guest even gets there. Otherwise, we're going to be behind the curve. And the offsetting of 1.5% is actually not good enough. We need to go to 3%. Because if we get to 1.5%, we're going to remain where we are right now. And we're already seeing the effects of climate change. So if we want to continue where we are right now with change, let's keep it at 1.5%. We need to be moving that needle downward to 3%. And then we can start reversing the impacts that we have as probably the world's largest employer and largest GDP contributor. And that's something that we need to bear in mind as well, is the potential for change sits with us, and we've got a massive role to play here.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Paul, do you remember what a waiting list is? Tell us a little bit about what Ventus has been doing in this space.
Those days are long gone. And we've obviously struggled like the rest of you, but there are some green shoots starting to appear now, which is encouraging. And everyone talks about this big wave that's going to come, and I don't think it is. I think we're going to see a very gentle return back to some form of normality. So we've got a sort of prickly road ahead of us still, I think. But nevertheless, it's exciting, and I like what my two fellow guests are saying. Hilton, I think if we don't start embracing community more so than ever, particularly down in South Africa, we're going to be in for some very difficult times, more so than ever. We really do need to start getting involved, and it's time for us as largely white owners to start looking over the fence and seeing how we can involve the community. So one of the projects that we are busy with, which is a fascinating one, because it will be the first urban private game reserve. And we've identified, it's not a huge pocket of land like you guys would deal with, Hilton. This is about 3,500 hectares, but it's nestled between Port Elizabeth and Uitenhage, or Gqeberha and Kariga, which is the new names of the two cities. And we are busy putting a master plan together for what will become a very unique reserve, because it's going to be sort of a halfway house for species that are in trouble. So, for instance, we all know that there have been problems with the elephants in Neisner. I think there is only one remaining, but there is a sanctuary with tame elephants. And so we're going to become a halfway house for them. We're going to attempt to rewild those and then reintroduce them to wild Neisner, which will be interesting. And then, of course, we all know about the new rules surrounding canned lion hunting, and so there are in excess of between 10 and 15,000 lions that are going to be euthanized, because obviously they can't be exported. Their bones can't be exported to China any longer, and you may no longer hunt a canned lion hunting. Lion. So we're going to again be seen as a halfway house for some of those. We'll be able to rescue some of those, and we're going to attempt to rewild them. And we're doing similar with some cheetah. And so we want Port Elizabeth and Uitenhage to fall in love with this whole urban project. But the biggest part of it is we are bolted onto a huge community. I mean, there's probably about 50,000 people that live in this township called Kwandabuche, and it borders us. It literally borders the game reserve, and so we've got to somehow get them engaged with our reserve, and we've got multiple projects that we will engage them on in terms of it virtually becoming their reserve. So that's one of the things we're doing. And then, Hilton, you mentioned again taking the guest behind the scenes, and I think that's so relevant too, is because we actually launched a program which some of you may have seen, which is called Mantis Impact, and it is I'll give you the more sexy product, but there's a lot of other things our guests can engage with. But obviously, one of the great ones is getting the opportunity to go out with our wildlife vet and be part of a rhino encounter. Obviously, we all know we're having to dehorn and collar rhino because of the current situation, and so we save those. We probably do 3 or 4 a year, but we save those specific moments for our guests now. And we had our first client about 2 weeks ago from America. And he was absolutely blown away by the experience. I call it the Jurassic Park effect, when they came across that great big dinosaur that was dying and just feeling it breathe and so on and so forth. It's one hell of an experience for somebody that comes from New York City. And so, and then, they hopefully get more immersed into it. One of the great projects that I was involved with in the early stages was a lot of the demand for rhino horn comes out of Vietnam. And so I was put in touch with the Madonna of Vietnam. She's a huge pop star out there. And I enticed her, along with the foundation, to come out to South Africa a few years ago, which she did. And we immersed her in one of these experiences. And then what she did was she went back to Vietnam, and there are probably 12 independent or private schools in Vietnam. And now we know the consumer in Vietnam is a very high-end, high net worth individual whose kids will be at those types of schools. So we ran a program with the singer, and she went to the schools and she enticed them to enter this competition, and all the kids entered. And then about 50 of these kids would come to South Africa, and they still do today. And then we take them on one of these immersions, and then they go back and they tell the rest of the school about their experience, and then hopefully that filters up to the parents that are consuming more. And we've certainly seen that as being hell of an impactful, more so than just trying to fight fire with fire down here, is to go and deal with the demand reduction. So those are the types of initiatives we get involved in, whether it be on the ground or internationally. But I think, I read such a fascinating article about a year ago during in the eye of the storm of COVID, and it was in the Daily Maverick. And you should Google this. It's I think they call it the conservation continent, and what the opportunity is for our continent as Africa. Because if you look at the rest of the world, the first one, so look at Europe as a classic example, and most of North America, it's completely industrialized. And so they have so little left in terms of natural resource, because they've destroyed it all. And this has happened over 500 years, the Industrial Revolution, et cetera, and somebody's just posted that article. But it is Africa's opportunity now to either, they can go one of two routes. They can become industrialized, or they can hang on to these assets, because the rest of the world is going to have to offset and do all this stuff. They can't do it in Europe because they've got very, very little wildland left. but they can start pumping resource into Africa and helping us protect it. So you've got this big decision that Africa needs to make, but it is a bloody big opportunity for the continent to become the conservation continent. And that excites me, I think, and we should all be excited about that. But we've just got to get, governments to embrace that too, because there is this greed factor, as we know, anywhere in the world. And anyway, that's kind of where I am.
Thanks, Paul. I have pasted that link into the chat, and feel free to have a look at it. I will have a read as well. I'm fascinated about the COP26 discussions around financing initiatives in Africa, a continent that bears the brunt of climate change, but has had very little to do about it, essentially. And yes, of course, we need to be doing as much as we can on the continent to ensure that we are reaching those sustainable goals. But at the end of the day, we also want to enroll the rest of the world in those goals, because essentially, what they do has a direct impact on us as a continent and the climate change events that we are experiencing on the continent. You talked a little bit about going behind the scenes, and I want to just pull Inga into the discussion, if I may. Inga, Radisson Group is massive. You're a massive, massive group with an immense amount of marketing power. How are you using that sustainability message and communicating that the behind the scenes sustainability message to all of your guests, so that when they return home, that they are practicing what you are doing so ably in your properties?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I want to connect to a point that that Hilton and Paul have made about involving the guests and making sure that the guests make these green choices. And we need to make it easy. So we need to do our fundamentals. I talked about green buildings and carbon and science-based targets, which is where also the companies need to flow their investments to, because that is serious business. It's really serious about, if the targets we're going to go towards, that's amazing. But about the guests, I think we need to make it easy. And one of the things we do is integrate it in the guest experience. For example, for our B2B clients, we have made all of our events worldwide carbon neutral. So we do that offsetting automatically and for the clients, because otherwise it becomes too complex for them and they don't want to invest and they don't want to do the effort. And we make that an experience thing as well. So we do it, of course, partially with the renewable energies and the hydropower and the wind power, but we also support on each of the continents where we are specific community projects. So carbon offsets that are high quality, but that also have a community dimension. So we can tell the story, and guests can take, if they attend a meeting or an event, they get a little certificate and they can take that story home. The other thing is really true, that we need to engage the guests more. And I think, and one of the things that Radisson is really putting all our weight behind is to set a standard. We need to look at the top, which is net zero. This is where we're going, but we also need to engage the basic level. There's so many, I'm not the speakers on this panel, but there are so many independent hotels out there that don't know where to start. Even in our group, we have so many franchisees, whether they are in India, they're in China, or even in the US, sometimes they don't know where to start. And this whole storytelling about, or this whole need of going to net zero is too daunting for them. So the other thing we are doing is to define a set of hotel sustainability basics for the industry. We're working with industry associations. Exciting news to come soon. I cannot reveal everything, but that is what we think. Yeah. COP is the news moment, guys. This is the moment where the news will break. But this is about making sure that everybody can get on the bandwagon and do sustainability, but also that we make it transparent to the guests, because we all know that there are so many frameworks. I've talked about eco labels. There is now the booking sustainability framework. You have the Google attributes. You have other of these booking. Expedia has launched the sustainable tourism with UNESCO. So there's so many frameworks. And as a guest, unless you are the really committed, engaged ones who enjoy stays with Hilton and Paul, you need to give them a quick, transparent, maybe label or level that they will recognize. And that is something we need to do, because in the recent booking sustainability report, the thing they do every year, 50% of the travelers said that they don't feel like they have enough sustainability options. And I think it's not because these options are not there, but it's because it's not clear to them what is really good sustainability, and it can be basic. So that's what we are also working on, the top and the bottom. And we've done tons of communications. For example, one of the things we did with Radisson Blu is to work on our buffets, to say, for example, that we integrate vegetarian and options that are light on water footprint, and we had communicated that in our menus with icons to say how much less water these dishes use, how much better vegetarian food is for the environment. So these kind of things we continue to communicate, and we're actually doing a test now with simple communication, because communication is in our world being digitized much more, which is a good thing. But we need to see where we can place this communication about what the hotel is doing, because if you're telling them everything they're doing, if it's a green hotel, if they phase out single-use plastics, if they put vegetarian options on the menu, if they offer green transportation, all these things, if they sponsor a community project and which one it is. So all these things together, we're testing that, and we're seeing if we're seeing a quality impact in our hotels, because we do check in our quality surveys if people recognize that the hotel is sustainable and if it is safe. That's my other hat. But the point is that we want to check how we can reach them best. And I was thinking of something else I wanted to say. Never mind, I forgot. So there is many opportunities to communicate to the guests. Oh yes, tower reuse, the classic. Everybody does tower reuse, but we have linked our tower reuse to water conservation projects. So for every towel that gets reused, we donate a fraction of those savings to water conservation. And then we tell the story about how many people we have through these projects provided with safe drinking water for life. And I visited these projects. I mean, these projects make a tremendous difference in the livelihoods of the families, the rate that kids can go to school, specifically the girls, for many reasons, the livelihoods of the families, the income for the women. I mean, it makes a tremendous difference in these communities. So we try to connect often urban hotels, business hotels, with a story about, an impact that tourism can have somewhere. And I think that's how we drive sustainable booking choices, and also with our basics, which are going to be the starting level to lift the floor of sustainability, hopefully for the whole industry.
Wonderful. So both you and Hilton have secrets that you cannot share with us, and I have to wait and see what those are. That's not fair, Inga. So Lisa's actually posted in the chat something that I was going to pose to Hilton, and we are a long haul destination. Let's talk Southern Africa specifically. I mean, I know this is Africa Travel Week. Long haul destination, flight shame, carbon emissions, airlines. How do you balance the argument of, yes, come and visit us so that you can help us with our conservation and community sustainability, but then at the same time, that carbon footprint of a really nice long haul from New York all the way down south? How would you, what argument should we be posing to those people who bring that up as an objection?
So Natalia, it's at face value, it's an unbelievably complex question to answer, but I think it's also relatively simple in the complexity. We remember the days of over-tourism, and that was gaining traction just before COVID, and we forget about over-tourism now. But a lot of the international airlines have actually been quite advanced in terms of looking at ways to mitigate their carbon footprints over a number of avenues, whether it be offset programs, looking at better fuel economies of scale in terms of the machinery of which it gets made on. So I wouldn't single out long-haul flights as the main driver and the main problem here. What I would do is I would actually have a look at it in terms of more the time spent and where the guest is actually traveling to during the itinerary. There's a lot to be said, for example, of what your carbon load would be if you came to a long-haul destination for 5 days as opposed to 21 days. If you were turning over a longer itinerary in an area and staying with responsible stakeholders during that itinerary, your carbon load gets reduced. But if you're going to be traveling and it's a shorter haul, long haul, then your carbon load is obviously increased. It's a fantastic correlation. So, I think that would be music to the tourism ears is, guests need to fly long haul, stay longer. And, you know, that's one way of being able to offset the carbon. Going back to what I was saying, there's some fantastic initiatives that you probably find that as leaders within this space, one of our biggest challenges is the actual level of communication that needs to occur. And how do you communicate it and where you communicate it? And that's probably our biggest challenge and also our biggest failing. Is you don't want to make it come across as if it is greenwashing, but at the same time, you need to communicate that it is actually authentic. You know, if you look at, for example, some of the projects that we've got underway, a lot of people don't even know about it. You know, we've got a Mamas project, which is running in Botswana, where we actually took about 20 ladies to India, to the Barefoot College, showed them on how to be able to make solar panels and brought them back. And they're now setting up their businesses in Botswana in order to move villages off the grid. And that's great, but the issue with that is that it's not a carbon offset program. That's actually more safety, security, and has other consequences in terms of education, which also then in turn again has a carbon offset, you know, impact. So that's why I was saying in the beginning is that this question, as simple as what it is also very, very
Sorry, Hilton, I think we are losing you. Paul, are you also experiencing? Yeah, you're kind of buffering a little bit. Just repeat. Yeah, your signal is a little bit low. I see the big three red bars up there. Maybe
okay, I'm going to swap channels. I'm going to come back into.
Okay, switch channels. How funny. We need to build redundancy when our internet is. That's not something you experience in London. Hey, Paul. All good.
No.
That's that.
Hilton's obviously very remote today. He must be in the middle of the bush.
Yeah, I'm back.
What is telling us?
I don't know where you lost me on that one, Natalia, but you know what I was just trying to say is that the industry is quite interconnected, and so I don't think a name or shame of one aspect is actually going to solve anything. You know, it is like Inga was saying, a point of communication, and how do we communicate this to the guests, but also how do we communicate this across stakeholders within the industry? You know, we have what we call, and we've had for a long time, what we call the copyleft program. So anything that Great Plains do in terms of water reticulation or carbon offsetting or solar panel generation or moving of plastics, for example, which was very topical a couple of years ago, we're more than happy to share that, both the learnings and the positives and the pitfalls that we've discovered. You know, and the idea is that it's good for the environment and it's also good for humanity. So as much as what it could be seen as proprietary, it's not something that we hold very, very close to our chest, because the more people that are doing it, the better we're all going to be as humans at the end of the day. And so conversations like this is the first time that we really are getting into serious situations where we can actually lead companies, or not lead, but just be able to say, you know, we're doing this, try that. You know, a project, for example, that we have is we collect glass bottles in Botswana, we crush them and we make bricks. But we don't shout about it, because it's kind of like the cost of doing business now. You know, you got to look bigger. You got to keep stretching yourself every single time. And again, I go back to every single business has a role to play in this. Whether you're choosing a product, whether you're actually involved in the product, if you're supplying industry into the product. And again, as a tourism industry, we can again influence those industries that are not necessarily in our business. I mean, we're looking at suppliers in terms of foodstuffs. If you just look at that, if every single hotel had to engage with their supplier in terms of single-use plastics, could you imagine what we could do in terms of single-use plastic generation? We could hugely offset. I love the fact that Inga's looking at their buffets. I'm not so sure how topical buffets are right now in terms of social distancing and being able to get on, but I see that that's coming back in. But also that food wastage is a huge cost to a business, you know, so there's opportunities there. And that's I think what's really, really great about this new narrative is that we are looking at this minutiae. And the minutiae is actually creating large effects on the ground for everybody.
I mean, let's talk about that supply chain and channel, if you will, Paul. You know, if I'm a DMC working with Mantis Collection, or a travel agent working with a tour operator, working with a DMC, what are the kinds of questions that you think I should be asking of my third-party suppliers to make sure that I am supporting those companies that are really invested, and not greenwashing, but are invested in sustainability? what are the questions we should be asking in the channel?
Before we go on to that, I just, when you talk about supply chain beyond just the tour operators and the agents and food, etc., I watched Sky News. It was probably about a month or two ago, and you talk about a supply chain like cement, as an example, and this is really going to surprise you, because I couldn't believe this. Did you know that cement production, the total emissions of cement production around the world are 7%. The total for emissions for aviation and deforestation are 4.1%. So, I mean, how's that? And there it is. There's the evidence. Probably coming out the wrong way on my phone, but
no, it's all good. We could see it.
I screen grabbed from Sky, but there's a classic example of where, we should be going after PPC cement and the likes and saying, guys, because I think they just fly completely under the radar, and everybody's building whatever. You go to a place like Dubai and you see what's happened there, and just imagine the impact that is having, because it's the process of making cement. You've got to use extreme heat to get it into that whatever. So as an organization, not necessarily as Mantis, we and Inga, I don't know if you know this, but Mantis is part owned by one of your competitors, Accor, the French group. So I'm listening with a lot of interest to what you have to say, because obviously Accor is trying to go down that similar path, and it's not that easy when you have these big buildings. For Hilton and I, it's a hell of a lot easier, because we've got we're working in the environment, we're working with nature and community. So that is a lot easier, but for the big bricks and mortar hotel groups, it's a challenge. So quite interestingly, just coming onto the whole cement thing, is we've been approached to look at a hotel in Cape Town, which is probably about 60% constructed, and they are not, the main structure is concrete, but all the internal walls are made from bricks that are made from hemp. So obviously the what do you call it? The waste from marijuana. And they're these big bricks, and I lifted them up. They're incredibly light. Not that I wanted to smoke them, Hilton. I could see you wanting to laugh at me there, but there's a classic example of where we could start adjusting and looking at things like that. But just coming back to your question, Natalia, I think it is, the questions that need to be asked are, I think, what is being done on the ground by those products, and all the things that Inga's mentioned now, tick boxes for people. And it's wonderful to see and hear what the Radisson guys are doing. And then, as I said, we obviously know the great work that Great Plains has done, and that likes of and Beyond and Wilderness. There's some amazing players out there, and I'd like to think that Mantis is up there too in that set. And I think you don't have to scratch too deep under the surface to see what we're up to. Not blowing my own trumpet or our own trumpet here, but I think it's accessible to everybody now. So if you are a consumer from the UK or America, just do a little bit of digging and unearth what we're doing on the ground, because it is quite remarkable. I think we are leading the way in a lot of different things as these big groups that I've mentioned to you. If you're uncertain, I think it's up to our sales teams to go and educate the agents and the tour operators on what we are doing. And I think we're quite good at that. We always go back and tell the stories about the amazing stuff that we are doing for the environment. And we're learning. I'm not saying we squeaky clean. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we've still got to learn. But I think we're always trying to innovate and come up with the next best thing. One of the things that we were doing just pre-COVID, and unfortunately it's kind of been it's been put on ice, is my father started Shamwari Game Reserve 30 years ago. We then sold it in 2010. We kind of exited, but what we did do was we kept our 300 hectares, and so we have the Founders Lodge adjacent to Shamwari, and all it was our family home, and we've turned it into a luxury lodge today. So it's a commercial lodge, and our guests then get traversing rights into Shamwari, so they're going to do the Big Five experience there. But our little patch of 300 hectares, we had planned to turn into an eco-lodge innovation hub. And the idea there was that we have the main lodge, but we were going to build 4 concept rooms down the valley. And so 2 would be tented, we'd do a tree house, and we'd do a pod. And then we'd get some innovators in to explore the latest technologies, because that's evolving all the time, in terms of solar and wind and what to do with grey water, etc. And so we were going to really pilot all of this down the valley. And then if you, as a guest, you could come and experience it, or as an investor that wanted a lodge in Saudi Arabia, come and test out the rooms and see what we're doing in terms of pushing the envelope in terms of innovation and that. And so that will revive eventually, but that's kind of where we sort of moving to as a group. We're always trying to innovate, much like all the groups that I've mentioned previously.
You see, Hilton and Inga, Paul's told us what he's doing. It's not a secret.
He seems to be smoking a lot of marijuana for that hemp. Even though, as it was said in the comments, it's not exactly the same stuff. So let's not get. You know what? To answer your question, you were asking what we can do as an industry. I think one of our travesties that we had as South Africans is that we had a wonderful event in the World Cup that everybody remembers with nostalgia. And leading up to that, a lot of properties inside South Africa were talking about their green offset programs and their community-based programs, etc., etc., and everybody was all excited about that. But regrettably, following that, we're finding that less and less and less of these programs are actually being maintained. Yet, either in marketing or in the remembrance of some of these experiences, we think and we seem to believe that they're still in play. And I think that's where the tour operators and the trade have a major role to play, but also keeping the industry honest, because they essentially do drive the tourism dollars through the value chain. And there's a huge amount of power that the tour operators can play in that by making sure that they're constantly re-looking and re-engaging with whoever their supplier is. I mean, I'm not saying that I would love everybody to be able to book Great Plains, Mantis, and Radisson on this call, and then our jobs are done, and then we could go on holiday for the rest of the year. But the point is that if you say you've got programs for your community or environmental in place, those are the programs that you're most proud of. And the quickest way to check on it is actually just ask somebody to show it to you, as opposed to being an annual report on a piece of paper, which is very easy to do. I mean, people are paid to produce beautiful books, but really interrogate and have those hard leading questions and say, last year you had this community-based program, let's see where it is. And what are you actually doing? I think we've moved past the dialogue of saying that we support local schools and local clinics and that. What does that actually mean? Painting the wall or sanding a couple of desks for kids in a classroom is not education. You've now got to mean how many educators are you employing and how much supplies are you doing? Because let's be honest, there are in Africa the instances where governments are not able to step up to that type of level of support for various reasons. It doesn't have to always be nefarious, but those should be moments of celebration. And I think that will then separate in this quagmire of suppliers that we have within the industry, those that actually do walk the walk, and then you get some of those that are just talking the talk. And I do admire, Mantis for a long stage. If you look at the genesis of that whole Shamwari game reserve, was streaks ahead of where we were as an industry at that particular time. So kudos to the Gardner family for doing that. The challenge is you've got to keep doing it every year, and you've got to keep bettering it every year. Same to the Radisson Group. You start off at a base and you just got to keep building. But that's where we need the levels of the support from the industry, because that allows that to continue. The stuff is not cheap that we're talking about. Offsetting programs, it might sound like you're saving, but you're not. There's a huge amount of capital outlay that goes into this type of stuff. And that's, again, then allows the guest to be able to educate it, and that continues the conversation. So the support of the industry is actually needed. And in fact, we actually need to ramp it up. And if you can start talking about conservation levies and start talking about all sorts of things. You don't save huge tracts of lands on $5 a night. That needs to be, that's a totally separate emotive conversation that can start occurring. So it's not an easy one of what we're talking about today.
And as you said, yes, Paul, carry on.
I said, just to add to that, a lot of people don't quite get, particularly now that we've been trying to attract locals to our game reserves. But we're so reliant on that big rate. And I just know from our little lodge here at Founders, because, we've got a bunch of rhinos running around there. And of course, we have to have an APU, an anti-poaching unit. We have to have electrification. We've got all these other expenses that a regular hotel doesn't have. And that's why we've got to charge these exorbitant rates to sustain these things. And I don't think the average Joe understands that. And we've really seen that during COVID, because obviously when we were running at decent occupancies and getting these rates, it wasn't an issue. But it's all come to fruition now. You've got so many, in particular in the hunting industry, so many guys that have got a lot of rhino on their reserves, sadly, getting rid of them now. I mean, you can pick up rhino for next to nothing in this country. It's another old legacy of COVID. So, yeah, they do come at expenses, a great expense. So.
Yeah, and then you get the whole thing around refunds and cancellations, especially if you're in the conservation and you're relying on that income to sustain your conservation efforts. My last question.
Something about non-competitiveness, because I think that's a key point that you made, Hilton and Paul, is to share, because you were talking about Accor. I know the team of Accor and the chief sustainability officer of Accor, for example, very well. We know each other. I mean, we are all part of associations where we work together with the larger companies, but also I think what needs to happen is what you are doing, is to make these tools available for the SMEs around the world. We need to provide these solutions, these tools, these insights for free, either through industry associations that work on sustainability in hotels, or through national tourism or destination-based tourism associations. But that's what needs to happen to also accelerate. And then I come back to my level of transparency that we need, because if we talk about what Radisson is doing and Accor talks about what they're doing, and you have a very nice storytelling, but then the guest may get confused. So we need to get something that is reliable and that can be used around the globe for at least entry-level sustainability, that is truthful, that is not greenwashing, that starts with measurement, that starts with doing, and that starts with having these tools also for SMEs. And I think that is what we need to do together, maybe destination-based, maybe in industry associations too. And I think a lot of parties are ready to do this and are already doing it. So some way to streamline that in a way and then accelerate. Because you're right, it's getting technical, it's getting more expensive, so you need to know what you're doing. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, I think
that non-competitive aspect is so important.
It's a very good point, and you've kind of touched on the next question that I had, which was, and I said it right at the start, this is a journey, it's not a destination, and it's easy to get overwhelmed, and in that overwhelm not do anything. So just say, it's too hard. It's too hard. I'll procrastinate over it and I'll look at it tomorrow, or I'll look at it next week. And of course, we've had COVID. And so really it has monopolized our attention. And so sustainability has unfortunately fallen off the bandwagon for many of us. So if I were to ask each of my panelists as a last question, I'm sitting here now and thinking, I have to do something. Give me one thing, just one thing that will start me off on the journey, so that I move in the direction I'm supposed to move, instead of hiding underneath my bed and hoping it will all go away. One thing. And I'll start with Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if you were a foreigner and you hadn't been to South Africa before, let's say that, so you didn't understand the world of conservation, etc. I would encourage you to get to South Africa and just come on one of these immersive holidays and come and educate yourself, because it's no longer about lying on a beach anymore, in my opinion. I think this conscious traveler is emerging, and I saw the impact of this, as I said, 10 days ago when we had Jeff from America come join us on one of those things. I mean, I think that changed his life, and so for me, that is those types of triggers. I always try and get people to come on one of those immersive things when they're unsure, and it will change your life, and you will really want to sink your teeth into it. And it wouldn't just be around a rhino. I'll get you into the community. I'll get you doing something pretty special, and thereby hopefully transforming you and just getting you on that positive path.
Hilton.
Wow. One thing. That's a tough one as well. You clearly chose all the tough conversation points today. But for me, it is talk to your stakeholders. Talk to people that you've got involved in your business. It's the easiest thing. Everybody realizes that we need to soften, and whatever that means, our impact on the environment. And I think it's what Inga's saying, is that it's so difficult to actually know what my impact is. But a journey starts with a single footstep. And so, if you're a property, start having a look at how you can start impacting on that. Start having meaningful conversations with your community members, not token conversations. I think as an industry, we can start having a look at our supply chain, start looking at who you're supporting, where are you directing those guests to, who are you promoting. If you're promoting a property that's still walking with lions and riding on elephants, have a moment to actually reflect on that. Is that something you still want to continue? And is it the right thing to be doing? I think at the basic premise of every single human being, because we're so intrinsically linked to nature, we need to have that introspective moment. And possibly now is the best time to do that, because we are waiting for that wave to come and that resurgence to come. And some of us are a little bit more bullish than maybe Paul is in terms of when that will hit. But that wave is going to come. There's no ways that the world is going to allow us not to be able to have tourism. We need to obviously try and bring it sooner than later for obvious reasons. But start having that conversation either with yourself or with your suppliers or your colleagues, or just talk about it. And you'll find that will lead you on the path of where you actually want to go. Like most problems in life, you try and bottle it up, you're never going to solve it. You have a conversation over a cup of coffee, that'll lead you onto something else. But be open to change, and be open that change may be painful, because it's not in the sense of physically painful, but it's going to take you out of your comfort zone, but it's going to be the right thing to do. And at the end of the day, it is going to separate you from the competition. If you are a lot more down this road, the market is looking for that, and make it tangible. Make it stuff that you can proudly show. And it doesn't have to be the big, hairy, scary things. People often look at Great Plains and they go, "Oh, you moved 100 rhinos." And you go, "Yeah, it's $45 million." Not everybody has access to that type of capital, but it doesn't have to be like that. It can be, how are you managing your properties? How are you managing your business? And that's what I would think. Just go from there.
See, not that difficult after all. Inga.
Yeah, I want to add, and I think this is would have been such a nice note to end on from Hilton, but I'm going to add a non-sexy subject. So I'm going to, if you're a hotel and you don't know where to start, I would say the first thing to do is actually measure your carbon footprint. And there's a very, very easy free tool to do that. It's called the Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative. I can share the link in a minute. And it's really because that's where you start. If you don't know your carbon footprint, it's actually quite easy to find out. With this simple tool, you just fill out a few things and then you know. And based on what you know, you just pick one thing, whether it is putting vegetarian menu options on your menu, or whether it is investing a bit in renewable, or maybe even buying 100% renewable energy, and tell that story to your guests. And from that conversation, you get into more and more and more and more. And that's where, when you start having that conversation, you're on your journey, because by setting that first step, it's going to be easier and easier and easier to set the next one, because you have engaged your guests. They will want to come to your property, your company, whatever you have, because of it. So, and then we create that massive impact of change.
Wow, well, a very practical tip to end on, Inga. Don't worry about it not being sexy. It was very practical, which is exactly what I was looking for. So thank you very much for being on this webinar with me today. I really appreciate your time, and we've had a lot of communication happening in the chat, some great stuff. Lisa, I'll have a look at what you are up to. You are working on a marketing and comms toolkit specifically for tour operators in collaboration with Travel Life. And so the discussion of how to tell, what to tell in terms of sustainability is of considerable interest. She would welcome input should anyone be keen, as well as sharing the final output. Yes, Lisa, thank you so much for that. And absolutely, Lorraine, you're doing a masterclass on sustainable circular supply chain for all stakeholders in tourism and hospitality. So there's some really great work that's happening, and there are some links. Thank you, Inga, for that. greenkey.global. We'll make sure that we will share those links with everybody when we send the recording out. Hilton, Paul, Inga, what a pleasure to spend this Tuesday morning with you. Thank you so much for hopping on and for your insights, and go forth and conquer. lead the way.
Well, look at that. Unreal.
Thanks
you
so
so
much
much.
for the opportunity.
Bye.
Good to see you guys.